Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a city built on resilience and shaped by generations of immigrants chasing the American dream. But on the morning of April 28, 2000, that dream turned into a nightmare. In less than 90 minutes, 6 people were shot, 5 of them killed. They were ordinary people, business owners, neighbors, immigrants, targeted solely because of their race or ethnicity. The man behind it all, Richard Scott Baumhammers, an immigration lawyer, quiet, educated, from a respected family, no criminal record, no history of violence. So why did he do it? Was it a mental break or something deeper, more dangerous? A carefully planned, hate-fueled rampage. This is not just the story of a mass shooter. It's the story of a radicalized mind, a trail of warning signs, in a community left forever scarred. This is the case of Richard Baumhammers, the attorney who turned to murder. Classification: spree, killer. Characteristics: racially motivated crime spree. Number of victims: 5. Date of murders: April 29, 2000. Date of arrest: same day. Date of birth: May 17, 1965. Victims profile: Anita Nikki Gordon, 63. Theo, femme, 27. G.A., son, 34. Anil Thakur, 31. Gary Lee, 2. Method of murder: shooting. Right 357 Magnum revolver. Location: Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, USA. Status: sentenced to 5 death sentences plus 112 years on May 11, 2001. Richard Scott Baumhammers, born May 17, 1965, is an American immigration attorney and spree killer who began a racially motivated crime spree on April 28, 2000 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which left 5 individuals dead and 1 paralyzed. Early life: Richard Baumhammers was born in Pittsburgh to Andres and Inez Baumhammers, both Lutheran Latvian immigrants who fled the Soviet annexation of their homeland. Both parents would become faculty members of the University of Pittsburgh School of Dental Medicine and would open a successful practice on Fifth Avenue near the university. Baumhammers was the second child to Andres and Inez. His older sister Diana was born in 1963. The family settled in the Pittsburgh suburb of Mount Lebanon. Both Richard and Dana attended Mount Lebanon High School and appeared to have succeeded academically. Richard was a second-string kicker on the Mount Lebanon High School football team. Dinah Baumhammers Pack would eventually become a member of the medical faculty at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland. After completing high school in 1983, Baumhammers graduated from Kent State University in Ohio in 1989 and began to pursue a law degree at Cumberland Law School in Birmingham, Alabama. A Cumberland classmate described Baumhammers as gregarious, a good student in the top third of his class. After graduating from Cumberland, Baumhammers enrolled in a specialized 1-year international program at the University of the Pacific's McGeorge School of Law in Sacramento, California, where he received a master's degree in transnational business practice and specialized in both immigration law and international law. For several years in the mid-1990s, Baumhammers lived in Atlanta, Georgia, where he was listed with the International Law Section members of the Georgia Bar Association. He was an active member as of March 2000. Emotional instability. Richard Baumhammers returned to Pittsburgh in the late 1990s and lived with his parents following a series of emotional problems. Baumhammers had been treated for mental illness since 1993 and had voluntarily admitted himself to a psychiatric ward at least twice. His father, Andres, would later to proclaim to have seen signs of mental illness since Richard was 4 years old, and later he would obsess about his physical appearance, believing that his face had been scarred by sunlight. However, dermatologists told Baumhammers that his skin was perfectly normal. Travel abroad. In 1993, Baumhammers traveled to Europe for a vacation, and upon returning home, his father was shocked by his son's emotional state. Andres Baumhammers would later testify that Richard told him that during a visit to Ukraine, he became euphoric, but that by the time he traveled to Finland, he believed people were following and harassing him. His father would also claim later that Richard told his parents that he was no longer able to openly speak to them because he believed the FBI was monitoring the house. Baumhammers insisted that his parents had to go into the basement to have a conversation with him using a pen and notepad. Andres Baumhammers claimed that Richard even asked at one point to be taken to Dr. Kevorkian to help him commit suicide. Richard Baumhammers admitted himself to Pittsburgh's Western Psychiatric Hospital and was diagnosed with delusional disorder of the persecutional type by Dr. Macheri Keshavan. Over the next several years, Baumhammers would see 8 psychiatrists, 4 clinical psychologists, and try 16 different medications. After his release, Baumhammers stayed with his parents in their Mount Lebanon home. He was a member of the Allegheny County Bar Association until he let his membership lapse in 1999. In 1997, the now unemployed Baumhammers traveled to Riga, Latvia, where he lived in an apartment on Krar Barona Avenue, less than a block away from where his grandparents had lived in the mid-1930s. He acquired Latvian citizenship and went about seeking to regain some of the family's properties lost during the Soviet occupation of Latvia. He made a claim under Latvia's denationalization process, but he was too late as any claims needed to be filed by 1996. According to several people who associated with him in Latvia, Baumhammers kept mostly to himself. And when he did socialize, he seemed to have felt most comfortable spending time with native Latvians and a few passing Latvian Americans. Those who met him in Latvia don't recall Baumhammers prone to violence or ever espousing any racist remarks, and the Latvian government has no record of Baumhammers ever getting in trouble with authorities. Several Latvian acquaintances, however, described Baumhammers intent on meeting women, but awkward. However, in the fall of 1999, Baumhammers was arrested in Paris, France, for striking a 50-year-old female bartender named Viviane Legarac because he believed she was Jewish. Baumhammers then told both Legarac and the arresting officers that he was mentally ill. The police took Baumhammers for evaluation to the psychiatric ward of the Hotel Dieu, a parish hospital, then detained him at a police station. By week's end, he left on a flight for Spain. On April 27, 1999, Baumhammers would purchase a .357 Magnum revolver in South Strabon Township, Pennsylvania. Friday, April 28, 2000, at 1:30 p.m. EST, Richard Baumhammers walked to the home of his next-door neighbor, a 63-year-old Jewish woman named Nikki Gordon, and fatally shot her, then set her house on fire. Gordon had been friends with Baumhammers' parents for 31 years. Afterwards, Baumhammers jumped into his black Jeep Cherokee and drove to the Beth El congregation in Scott Township, where Gordon was a member of the synagogue. There he fired into the windows of the synagogue, then exited his vehicle and spray-painted 2 red swastikas on the building. A short distance from the synagogue at the India Grocer in Scott Town Center, year-old Anil Thakur, formerly of Bihar, India, was shot to death while picking up groceries on his lunch hour. A 25-year-old store manager named Sandeep Patel was shot in the neck and paralyzed. Patel would be wheelchair-bound for the next 7 years before dying at the age of 32 in February 2007 from complications due to pneumonia at UPMC in McCandless, Pennsylvania. Baumhammers next drove to the Ahavath Achim congregation in Carnegie, where he shattered the synagogue's glass windows with gunfire. At Robinson Towney Center, about 10 miles from his home, he walked into Yafei Chinese cuisine, where two Asian Americans, Chinese restaurant manager Jie Sun, age 34, and Theo Tony Pham, a 27-year-old Vietnamese-American cook, were fatally shot in front of customers. From Robinson Town Center, Baumhammers drove to the C.S. Kim School of Karate in Center Township, Beaver County, where Gary Lee, a 22-year-old African-American, was exercising with a European-American friend, George Thomas II. Baumhammers initially pointed the gun at Thomas, then turned and fired at Lee, killing him instantly. Arrest and trial. Richard Baumhammers was pulled over in his Jeep and arrested at 3:30 p.m. EST in the town of Ambridge, Pennsylvania. Baumhammer's spree lasted 2 hours and ran a 15-mile trail that crossed 3 townships. Richard Baumhammers was charged with 19 crimes, which included 8 counts of ethnic intimidation, 2 counts of arson, 2 counts of criminal mischief, 1 count of arson, 1 count of reckless endangerment of another person, 1 count of violation of uniform firearms, 2 counts of institution vandalism, 1 count of aggravated assault, and 1 criminal attempt, and 5 criminal homicides. When Pittsburgh police officers searched Baumhammer's Mount Lebanon home, they found a document for the Free Market Party written by Baumhammers, which read like a manifesto and listed him as the chairman. The document purportedly champions the rights of European Americans and complains that they are being outnumbered by minorities and immigrants. Baumhammers had also created an internet website on which he called for an end to non-white immigration and stated that almost all present-day immigration is non-European. On May 19, 2000, Allegheny County Common, Please Judge Lawrence J. O'Toole ruled that Baumhammers was unfit to stand trial and ordered Baumhammers undergo at least 90 days of psychiatric treatment. O'Toole made his decision after 3 psychiatrists examined Baumhammers, each coming to the conclusion that Baumhammers was psychologically unstable, and each proffering a different diagnosis. One testifying that Baumhammers was a paranoid schizophrenic, another testifying that Baumhammers suffered from psychotic thought disorder, and the last testifying that he suffered from a delusional disorder. On May 1, 2000, Richard Baumhammers was arraigned on charges of homicide, arson, and hate crimes. His bond was set at $1 million. On May 9, 2001, a jury found Richard Baumhammers guilty on all 19 charges. 2 days later, on May 11, 2001, after deliberating for 20 minutes, the same jury requested that Baumhammers be executed for his crimes. Baumhammers is scheduled to die by lethal injection and is currently incarcerated on death row at Green State Correctional Institute in Waynesburg, Pennsylvania, awaiting judicial appeal dates. Richard Scott Baumhammers, a racist immigration lawyer in Pittsburgh, went on a 1-hour ethnically motivated shooting rampage, leaving 5 dead in 4 different locations. The victims were a Jewish woman, an Indian grocer, 2 Asian employees in a Chinese restaurant, and an African-American man in a karate school. A second Indian man was critically wounded. Richard Scott Baumhammers, the 34-year-old rampager, reportedly was trying to form a political party to act against immigrants. Not surprisingly, he had unspecified mental problems that led to a recent voluntary hospitalization. The killings took place within a 20-mile range through suburbs surrounding Pittsburgh. Baumhammers used a .357 caliber handgun for the rampage. Police first responded to a small fire at the home of Anita Gordon in Mount Lebanon, next door to the home of Baumhammers' parents. Gordon, 63, was found dead inside the home. She had been shot several times. Baumhammers allegedly set a small fire at the house after killing Gordon, whom he had known since childhood. Next, Baumhammers shot at the Beth El Congregation Synagogue and painted the word Jew on the front and swastikas on the outside walls. Then he stopped at an Indian grocery store in Carnegie, where he killed Anil Thakur, 31, and critically wounded Sandeep Patel, 25. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette said he was shot in the neck and was facing the possibility of permanent paralysis. Kent Kretzler, a witness who owns a travel agency next to the Indian grocery, said Baumhammers appeared calm as he walked out of the store, tucked away a gun, and got into his car. He sat for maybe 5 or 10 seconds without doing anything, and just very calm and collectedly pulled out as if pulling out after buying a bag of groceries, Kretzler said. Then he did another drive-by on a synagogue in Carnegie before stopping at the Yaffe Chinese cuisine restaurant and killing Thao Pham, 30, a delivery man of Vietnamese descent, and Jie Sun, 34. The Chinese manager of the restaurant. About 15 minutes, he stopped at a karate school in a shopping plaza where he shot to death 22-year-old Gary Lee. On May 18th, Baumhammers was deemed incompetent to stand trial and ordered transferred to Mayview State Hospital for treatment. Judge Lawrence O'Toole said Baumhammers was incompetent to aid in his own defense on homicide charges and could be tried later if his mental state improves. Baumhammers, a 34 former immigrant lawyer, is accused of fatally shooting 5 people and wounding a 6th in Allegheny and Beaver counties, April 28th. His victims were Jewish, Indian, Vietnamese, Chinese, and Black. The son of Latvian refugees, Baumhammers ran a website that touted the rights of immigrants from Europe over those from the Third World. One of the psychiatrists who interviewed him testified that Baumhammers had an eerie emotional detachment and was paranoid, believing he had been poisoned during trips to Europe. He and 2 other psychiatrists testified that Baumhammers was unfit for a trial. Richard Scott, Baumhammers, 5. On April 29, 2000, racist immigration lawyer Richard Scott Baumhammers went on a 1-hour ethnically motivated shooting rampage, leaving 5 dead in 4 different locations around the city of Pittsburgh. The victims were a Jewish woman, an Indian grocer, 2 Asian employees in a Chinese restaurant, and an African-American man in a karate school. A second Indian man was critically wounded. The 34-year-old rampager reportedly was trying to form a political party to act against immigrants. Not surprisingly, he had unspecified mental problems that led to a recent voluntary hospitalization. The killings took place within a 20-mile range through suburbs surrounding Pittsburgh. Baumhammers used a .357 caliber handgun for the rampage. Richard Baumhammers, May 11, 2001. Unemployed racist immigration lawyer Richard Baumhammers was sentenced to death for killing 5 people in a shooting spree through suburban Pittsburgh. Baumhammers, 35, was sentenced by the same jury that found him guilty of the April 28, 2000 racially motivated attacks. Baumhammers showed no expression as the sentence was read and nodded slightly to his parents as he left the courtroom. During the trial, psychiatrists testified that Baumhammers was tormented by delusions that the FBI and CIA were on his tail, that the family maid was a spy, and that his skin was peeling off. Defense lawyers asked jurors to spare his life, saying his mental state made it impossible for him to control his actions. Prosecutor Ed Borkowski acknowledged that Baumhammers was mentally ill, but said he was controlled, deliberate, calculating, and selective in picking victims, avoiding attention, and eluding police. He added that Baumhammers read racist and anti-immigration literature, saw Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh and Nazi leader Adolf Hitler as heroes, and wanted to recruit others to help him fight against non-white immigration. Lawyer lived unnotable life until now. Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, 29 April 2000. The one-man rampage police identified as Richard Scott Baumhammers was by all accounts a young man remarkable only for his intelligence, a man who lived so quietly that most neighbors didn't know he was there. The 34-year-old Baumhammers, accused of a horrific series of events yesterday that appeared to target racial and ethnic minorities and left 5 dead and 1 critically injured, described himself as an international lawyer and was remembered as a promising student. 5 killed in PA. Shooting rampage. Philadelphia Inquirer, 29 April 2000. A white man opened fire in several suburban Pittsburgh communities yesterday, killing 5 people and critically wounding a 6th in what police called a racially motivated shooting rampage. The man was taken into custody. The shootings took place within a 20-mile range through suburbs surrounding Pittsburgh during about an hour's span yesterday afternoon. The gunman fatally shot a person of Indian descent at an Indian grocery store, 2 employees at a Chinese restaurant, and a black man at a martial arts school. 5 shot dead in Pennsylvania rampage. Police say the killings were racially motivated. The Boston Globe, 29 April 2000. Beaver Falls, PA. A gunman allegedly set fire to a neighbor's house and embarked on a shooting spree that killed 5 people in the Pittsburgh suburbs yesterday in what police are calling a racially motivated rampage. Authorities identified the suspect as Richard Baumhammers, a white 34-year-old lawyer who lives in the quiet, upscale town of Mount Lebanon. He was arrested shortly after the 5th slaying and is being held without bail in Beaver Falls. Cold Killer's 20-mile trail leaves 5 dead. Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, 29 April 2000. What was so chilling was the unhurried, methodical demeanor of a goateed gunman firing a handgun and wreaking ethnic and racial terror from an old money section of Mount Lebanon to an Indian grocery, a Chinese restaurant, and a karate school. Along the 20-mile trail of blood across 2 counties, 5 people were slain yesterday. Another was gravely wounded, and 2 synagogues were damaged by gunshots. One, the temple of the woman who is believed to be the first victim, was defaced with a spray-painted swastika. They poisoned me. Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, 30 April 2000. Richard Scott Baumhammers had a history of mental illness, believed he had been poisoned on one of his frequent trips to Europe, and spent days before his 2-county shooting rampage trying to recruit members for a right-wing, anti-immigrant political party. Baumhammers, 34, an attorney who once studied immigration and international law, is accused of targeting racial and ethnic minorities in a 2-hour rampage that killed 5 and left 1 man critically wounded. Portrait of a loner emerges. Philadelphia Inquirer, 30 April 2000. As police continued their investigation yesterday of an immigration lawyer, they say fatally shot 5 people, including 3 immigrants. A picture of a wealthy young man who became an alienated recluse, began to emerge. Authorities said there may be further clues to the apparent hate crime in a two-page note found in the Mount Lebanon home where Richard S. Baumhammers, 34, lived with his prosperous and successful parents. Computer writings on race are seized. Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, 30 April 2000. Investigators seized computer equipment and writings about race from Richard Baumhammers' Mount Lebanon home to determine if a suburban shooting rampage that killed 5 people and critically wounded a 6th Friday were hate crimes. The evidence will help prosecutors decide whether to seek the death penalty for Baumhammers, 34, an out-of-work immigration lawyer suspected in all 6 shootings. Returning to the scenes of the crimes, Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, 30 April 2000. Along the route of a killer, a merciful but eerie quiet yesterday enveloped the suburban stations of Friday's blood and horror and madness, just as it had 24 hours before Virginia Manor lay in the dappled April sunshine of Mount Lebanon. The house where 63-year-old Nikki Gordon took 6 or 7 bullets was as serene as ever, its driveway hoop and backboard waiting in the breezy silence for its own unscheduled shoot-around. Suspect in bias shootings has history of mental illness. Lexington Herald leader, 1st May 2000. Pittsburgh, the man arrested in a killing spree that left 3 immigrants, a Jewish woman, and a black man dead, had a history of mental illness and irrational fears that he was being watched, a former friend and his attorney said yesterday. Police searching the home where Richard Scott Baumhammers, 34, lived prior to Friday's attacks also found a 3-page manifesto indicating he was trying to form a political party opposed to immigration, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette reported. He thought she was Jewish and punched her. Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, 5 May 2000. Richard Baumhammers, who is accused of killing 5 people and wounding another in a string of racially motivated attacks, was arrested 6 months ago in Paris after punching a woman because he thought she was Jewish. Last night, police in Paris said Baumhammers, 34, a lawyer and self-styled leader of a far-right anti-immigration party, was arrested October 21 after punching a woman in a bar on that city's left bank. He spent the night in a Paris jail and was later released. Baumhammers ruled not fit to go on trial. Shooting rampage suspect will get 90 days of psychiatric treatment. Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, 19 May 2000. Richard Baumhammers has been ordered to undergo at least 90 days of psychiatric treatment before he stands trial in the April 28 slayings of 5 people in 2 counties and wounding another. After the 90 days of treatment, Baumhammers will be reevaluated to see if he is then fit to take part in his own defense and to understand the charges against him. Baumhammers bragged in jail, fellow inmate says. Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, 22 May 2000. Accused killer Richard Baumhammers bragged about killing 5 people, predicted his family's money and his own legal background would help him out of his legal troubles, and even fished for information about whether a federal or state prison was a more desirable place to serve time, according to an inmate housed next to him in the days following his arrest. Still another inmate who shared a holding cell with Baumhammers during a mental competency hearing 3 weeks later said the Mount Lebanon lawyer. Shooting victim's widow files wrongful death suit against Baumhammers. Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, 22 June 2000. A wrongful death lawsuit against Richard Baumhammers has been filed on behalf of the manager of a Chinese restaurant who was killed during an April 28th shooting rampage. Mei Ling Kung, the widow of Ji Ye Jerry's son, filed the civil suit this week in Allegheny County Common Pleas Court, seeking compensatory and punitive damages of at least $75,000 for wrongful death, the loss of earning capacity, and the loss of future earnings. She is seeking a jury trial. Shooting victim leaves hospital today. Gunman's April rampage has left man paralyzed. Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, 29 August 2000. 4 months and a day after a gunman shot him in the neck during a shooting rampage that targeted ethnic minorities, 26-year-old Sandeep Patel is finally getting out of the hospital. He is paralyzed from the neck down and faces the very real possibility he will never again use his arms or legs. Baumhammers ruled competent to stand trial. Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, 16 September 2000. Richard Baumhammers has been declared competent to stand trial on charges that he killed 5 people and caused crippling injuries to a 6th person during a shooting rampage across 2 counties in April. A request to remain in a state hospital to be treated was denied. Common Pleas Judge Lawrence J. O'Toole yesterday ordered Baumhammers, 35, of Mount Lebanon, transferred from Mayview State Hospital's Forensic Psychiatric Unit to the Allegheny County Jail. Immigration attorney, guilty in killing spree. The Press of Atlantic City, May 10, 2001. A jury convicted a former immigration lawyer Wednesday of killing 5 people in a shooting spree last year, in which he drove through the suburbs, calmly selecting non-white victims. Richard Baumhammers, a 35-year-old non-practicing attorney, also was convicted of 8 counts of ethnic intimidation in the rampage that left a 6th victim paralyzed. The jury took 3 hours to convict him on 5 counts of first-degree murder in the April 28, 2000 shootings. He displayed no emotion as the verdicts was read. Man gets 5 death sentences plus 112 years for Pittsburgh area slayings. Philadelphia Daily News, September 7, 2001. Calling it the most grotesque, vicious, and frightening case he's seen, a judge has formally sentenced mass killer Richard Baumhammers to 5 death sentences, plus 112 to 225 years in prison. In imposing the death penalties, a jury delivered in May, Allegheny County, Judge Jeffrey Manning yesterday rejected defense claims. Baumhammers was too mentally ill to know what he was doing when he shot and killed his Jewish neighbor, 2 Asian men, an Indian man, and a black man. 5 killed in suburban Pittsburgh shootings. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. At least 5 people were killed and another critically wounded when a gunman went on a 2-county shooting spree that began in his own neighborhood and included 2 synagogues and several minority-owned businesses, police said. A suspect was apprehended about 1.5 hours after the shooting spree started, police said. Police in Center Township, Pennsylvania, are holding Richard Baumhammers, 35, in connection with the shooting deaths of his wife, 2 Chinese restaurant employees, and a karate student. Officials reported that another victim, a man of Indian descent, had also died after being shot at a grocery. At this time, we feel secure that the suspect involved is apprehended, Lieutenant T.J. Gianni of the Mount Lebanon Police told CNN. It is believed that the suspect, who is presently incarcerated in the jail in Beaver County, was responsible for these events. Allegheny County Police Acting Superintendent Paul Wolf agreed. The FBI is assisting in the investigation. Police believe the shooting spree began at the Mount Lebanon home of a woman whose body was found by officials responding to a fire alarm. After extinguishing the fire, they found the body of a woman who had been shot. Within a matter of minutes of her body's discovery, police received reports of shootings in Scott Township, a bordering community about 5 minutes from Mount Lebanon. Soon after that, shootings were reported in nearby Robinson and Center Townships, both in Beaver County. The gunman opened fire in an Indian grocery store in Scott Township, killing one person inside and critically wounding another. Two more people were killed at a Chinese restaurant, and a third was shot dead outside a Korean-owned karate studio in Center Township. Vin Trung, a cook at the Ya Fei Chinese Cuisine restaurant at the Plaza at Robinson Town Center in McKees Rocks, said his brother-in-law was one of the two persons shot there. Trung was in the kitchen when an employee ran from the front of the restaurant, telling everyone to escape. Instead, he left the kitchen and saw his brother-in-law on the floor. "I see my brother Tony on the floor," said Trung, who did not give the man's full name. "I tell everybody, somebody shot Tony." Diane Winsip said she was in her pizza shop with her sister and two children in Center Township. The door opened for them to enjoy the breeze when the shooting there broke out. "We heard 5 or 6 gunshots coming from CS Kim Karate, a karate school next door," she told a Pittsburgh television station. "We went to the front door to see what the noise was," she said. "A man walked by carrying a briefcase and a gun," she said, and walked to his Jeep. There he squeezed off a couple more shots, then got in his Jeep and drove casually away. "He acted like nothing happened," she said. Winsip said she took down the man's license plate number, then ran to the karate studio where she found a student lying face down. 2 conservative synagogues also were targets. At 2 p.m., a man stopped his car in front of the Ahavath Akim Synagogue in Carnegie, got out and shot out the glass doors in the front of the small building, said Lynn Roth, whose husband runs the Center for Worship. "No one was hurt," she said. A driver in a passing car took down the car's license plate number and informed police, Roth said police had told her. At 2:30 p.m., the glass front doors of Beth El Synagogue, south of Pittsburgh, were shattered by gunshots. 2 swastikas and the word Jew were spray-painted in red on the building housing the conservative synagogue. No one was injured, and the nursery school was on vacation for the Passover holiday, said Rabbi Neil Scheindlin. Pittsburgh gunman had racial motives. Police in Pittsburgh investigating a shooting rampage which left 5 people dead last Friday say the suspect had set up his own party opposed to non-white immigration. Richard Baumhammers, 34, of the Pittsburgh suburb of Mount Lebanon, had named himself chairman of the Free Market Party, which he described as a Mr. Baumhammers, whose parents emigrated to the United States from Latvia, allegedly killed his Jewish neighbor, 2 Asian men in a Chinese restaurant, an Indian-born grocer, and a black karate student. He is also accused of shooting into 2 synagogues and spray-painting a swastika on one. Mental illness. Lieutenant David Walsh of the Allegheny County Police Department said Mr. Baumhammers was trying to recruit members to the Free Market Party anywhere he could get someone to sit and listen. Mr. Baumhammers had a history of mental illness and had been placed in the psychiatric unit of a Mount Lebanon hospital last year for more than a week after he complained that he had been poisoned during a trip to Europe, police said. Mr. Baumhammers qualified as a dental surgeon and was a professor at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. He described himself as both an international and immigration lawyer, but appears to have done little legal work in recent years. Mr. Baumhammer's attorney, William Defenderfer, has said that his client has a history of mental illness, but refused to elaborate. "It is way too early to say anything," he said. Mr. Baumhammers is now being kept under suicide watch at Beaver County Jail. Funeral. On Sunday, about 700 people gathered at a Hindu temple to remember Anil Thakur, 31. One of the men gunned down at the Indian grocery. Another man, Sandeep Patel, 25, remained hospitalized in a critical condition. The Indian community stands strongly united in condemning this violence, said Vinod Shah, the chairman of the Hindu Jain temple in Monroeville. "We cannot forget our belief in nonviolence. The attacks came 2 months after another shooting rampage in the Pittsburgh suburbs. On the 1st March, Ronald Taylor, who is black, allegedly killed 3 white men and wounded 2 others. Police said they found hate writings in Mr. Taylor's apartment expressing harsh opinions of Jews, Asians, Italians, and the media. Cold Killer's 20-mile trail leaves 5 dead. What was so chilling was the unhurried, methodical demeanor of a goateed gunman firing a handgun and wreaking ethnic and racial terror from an old money section of Mount Lebanon to an Indian grocery, a Chinese restaurant, and a karate school. Along the 20-mile trail of blood across 2 counties, 5 people were slain yesterday. Another was gravely wounded, and 2 synagogues were damaged by gunshots. One, the temple of the woman who is believed to be the first victim, was defaced with a spray-painted swastika and the word Jew. In the final act of mayhem, played out over 72 minutes, the gunman killed a black karate student after he reportedly pointed his weapon at, but spared the life of a white companion. "What's wrong with these people? What's wrong with this world?" said a dumbfounded Shirley Kelly of Raccoon at the scene of the final killing in Beaver County. Taken into custody was Richard Baumhammers, 34, believed to be an import-export and immigration lawyer who grew up in Mount Lebanon, where his parents own a home. The son of dentists, he was arrested at about 3:24 p.m. yesterday in Ambridge, his black Jeep Grand Cherokee littered with spent shells and a bag containing a .357 caliber handgun. A bomb squad was called to investigate a suspected incendiary device. During his arraignment in Beaver Falls, on 1 count of murder and recklessly endangering another person, the 6'2" Baumhammers appeared to smirk. He wore a bulletproof vest over a faded black t-shirt. As police rushed him to a police car for a trip to the county jail, people in a crowd that gathered yelled out, "He needs the death penalty, and you're gonna die." He was being held last night without bail in the Beaver County Jail. 4 other homicide charges and related charges are pending in Allegheny County. "We are taking the tack of ethnic intimidation, a hate crime," said Paul Wolf, acting Allegheny County Police Superintendent. The victims included a Jewish woman who was Baumhammer's neighbor, a native of India who worked at the exotic India grocers in Scott, 2 Asian Americans who worked at the popular Yafei Chinese cuisine in Robinson and were shot in full view of 6 customers, and a 22-year-old black man from Aliquippa who was taking a beginner's karate class. The wounded man also was of Indian descent. Because the synagogues were hit, the FBI is investigating whether there are any violations of federal civil rights laws. About 25 agents and other support personnel are on the case and have offered assistance to the various police agencies involved, according to Special Agent Jeff Killeen of the FBI. "We're prepared to help in any way we can. We're treating this with the utmost urgency," Killeen said. It was the second murderous shooting rampage in 2 months in the region. On March 1st, 3 people were killed and 2 others were wounded at an apartment building and 2 fast food restaurants in Wilkinsburg. The victims were white. The suspect, Ronald Taylor, who has been found incompetent to stand trial because of schizophrenia, is black and is being held at Mayview State Hospital. He was also charged with ethnic intimidation. Governor's Ridge in California, to speak to a Republican group, was stunned at the news. "Not again." Those are the first words that came to my mind. "Not again," Ridge said. "We are struggling to make sense of what appears to be yet another brutal, racist rampage. Shotguns everywhere." Yesterday's chain of events began at 1:43 p.m. when Mount Lebanon firefighters responded to an alarm at a stately home at 788 Elm Spring Road. On arrival, firefighters found a burning rug and the body of Nikki Gordon, 63, married, and the mother of 3 children. Police said she had been shot. The neighborhood, called Virginia Manor, is one of the most affluent areas of the South Hills, where judges, doctors, and business leaders live in brick colonials or stone mansions with velvety lawns and mature trees. At about the same time, police in neighboring Scott got a call about a shooting at the India Grocers in Scott Town Center and summoned Mount Lebanon police to back them up. "That's when it got crazy," said Mount Lebanon Police Chief Tom Ogden. The serene neighborhood was shattered by the sight of police officers toting shotguns or having handguns drawn, shutting off traffic. Moments later, tactical team officers in olive helmets and camouflage clothing joined the sweep. "There were cops with shotguns everywhere," said Steve Vogt, who lives nearby on Cochrane Road. "It was pretty scary." Gwen Zeichner, who also lives a few blocks away on Bower Hill Road, said she'd been walking to visit her parents in their Virginia Manor home when she too was stopped by police. "The cops were setting up and they were yelling at me, 'Go, go, go, get out of here,'" she said. "So I ran scared to death. I just can't believe this. This is very unusual for this neighborhood." Meanwhile, the gunman struck at Beth El Congregation of the South Hills, a brown brick complex off Cochrane Road in Scott where Nikki Gordon worshipped. It houses a temple social hall and nursery school attended by 116 preschool children. About half of those children were attending the school's afternoon session when the gunman opened fire, blowing out the smoked glass doors at the temple's entrance with a half-dozen shots. The children, however, were in another section of the building and did not know what was happening in the front temple. President Sheila Schmeltz said, "They were not harmed and were not told what had happened." Using red paint, the gunman also daubed 2 swastika symbols on the bricks to the left side of the door and scrawled the word Jew on shards of glass that remained hanging in 2 of the front doors. He also scrawled another word, but investigators said they could only discern the letter R because the remaining glass fell and broke. The gunman apparently left Scott by traveling over Swallow Hill Road into Carnegie, at the intersection of Chestnut and Lydia Streets. He paused long enough outside the buff brick 2-story building that houses a Havath Achim congregation to fire at least 4 shots at 2:11 p.m. 2 of the bullets pierced each of the glass front doors. A third tore into a front window, barely missing the center candle of the electrified menorah that adorns the temple's entrance. "It's so unfortunate. We never had any problems here in Carnegie. We've always felt very welcome here," said Stanley Roth, a past president who serves as spiritual leader of the congregation because it's too small to have a full-time rabbi. The conservative congregation has about 45 families. Roth also was fearful that the gunfire had harmed the temple's 4 Torahs, or holy scrolls, but the shots did not pierce the wall leading to the temple's sanctuary. Roth said he knew of no reason why someone would target the temple, other than, "I guess it's someone who hates Jews." This certainly brings back memories of things that have happened to Jews all over the world, things that we never expected to follow us to Carnegie. No panic, no anguish. Shortly before 2 p.m. at India Grocers in Scott Town Center, Kent Kretzler, owner of Travel Connections, was sitting at his desk when he saw the gunman walking by his front window. The gun was drawn and held straight out. He was wearing a blazer and dark pants. Kretzler said he heard 5 or 6 cracking sounds, and then he saw a man walk past carrying a gun. He showed no panic, no anguish, nothing. He was very calm, Kretzler said. Kretzler said the gunman walked calmly to his car, which was parked in a handicapped spot. "I'm looking at that gun thinking, my God, that's real," Kretzler said. India's Grocers sells a variety of items including spices oils, ginger rice, garlic, and coconuts. Killed was Anil Thakur, 31, a native of Bihar, India, who has no known relatives in America. He was here on a work permit for the Widecom Group of Canada. Shot in the neck was the store's manager, Sandeep Patel, 25. Doctors at Mercy Hospital operated on him for 2 hours to remove the bullet. He is in stable condition, but faces the possibility of permanent paralysis. 2 storefronts away from the grocery is Noble Craftsman, a store that sells needlepoint picture frames and other arts and crafts items. "We heard a crack, crack, crack," said store owner Pat Finley. She said she thought it was someone with an electric staple gun. After the gunman left, police received reports of shots being fired at the Ahavath Akim congregation at 500 Chestnut, St. Carnegie. Bullet holes were found in a ceiling and a wall, but no one was hurt. Then about 2:30 p.m., the manager and a delivery man were gunned down at the popular Yafei Chinese cuisine at Robinson Town Center. Killed were G. Ye Jerry Son, 34, of Churchill, and Theo Tony Pham, 27, of Mount Lebanon. Witnesses said the gunman had asked for them by name before opening fire. Vinh Trong, a Vietnamese worker who was cooking in the kitchen, said customers started yelling because someone had come into the restaurant and started shooting. "I came out of the kitchen and saw Tony on the floor," he said. "They said the gunman asked, 'Where's Tony? Where's Jerry?'" Trong said he is the brother-in-law of the delivery man who started working in the restaurant about 7 months ago. Pham and Trong lived together in Castle Shannon. Pham's wife Bonnie and son Chris, 5, arrived at Robinson Town Center shortly after 4 o'clock. Grief counselors met with them and other family members outside the restaurant. The family was not permitted inside. Police blocked a section of the shopping center plaza for about 5 hours while they conducted their investigation inside the restaurant. Feeling for a pulse. The gunman's trek next took him to C.S. Kim's School of Karate off Route 60 in Center Township, Beaver County, where Gary Lee, 22, of Aliquippa, was shot. Lee began taking classes 3 weeks ago and arrived at about 2:45 p.m. with his best friend, according to schoolmaster Marcus Murtaugh. They were the only students in the place. According to a police affidavit, George Thomas II said a gunman entered and pointed a weapon at him. Thomas said the gunman then directed the gun at Lee, shooting him several times. Thomas later picked Baumhammers from a photographic lineup as the shooter, police said. Diane Wenzig of Center was in her pizza shop Center Pizza shortly before 3 p.m. when she heard what sounded like gunshots. "I was sitting there with my kids and sister, and we heard bam, 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 bam. Multiple shots," Wenzig said. "I went to the window because I was curious, and he came walking by. He was just calmly walking down the sidewalk, and then I saw the gun." Wenzig locked her shop door as the suspect, wearing sunglasses, a sport coat, and carrying a briefcase under his arm, walked at a normal pace toward his Jeep. And then he popped off another couple of shots. "I didn't see what he shot at, and then he calmly drove off," she said. Wenzig wrote down the vehicle's license number and then went 2 doors down to the karate school. On the floor, she saw Lee on the floor in his karate attire, bleeding and having trouble breathing. Murtaugh was on the phone with 911 and handed the phone to Wenzig to give the description and license of the car. Lee stopped breathing. The dispatcher told her to turn him over, and she did so. She saw wounds in his chest and on an arm. "I was holding his wrist, feeling for a pulse. He quit breathing on us," she said. Police quickly closed in on the getaway car. Aliquippa patrolman John Fratangeli was parked on Route 51 near the Aliquippa Ambridge Bridge when he spotted Baumhammer's black Jeep driving by. He said he followed him over the roadway and into Ambridge. He didn't turn on his flashing lights until he saw Ambridge police who could back him up. Fratangeli, 28, said, "At first he thought he was going to be in the midst of a shootout, but after an Ambridge car blocked his path, Baumhammers stopped his car and complied with the officer's requests. He showed no emotion," Fratangeli said. Baumhammer also did not say anything to the officers. Fratangeli said police found bullets on the car seat and the floor, and that Baumhammers had more rounds in his pocket. "There's no doubt in my mind he wasn't finished yet," Fratangeli said. The rampage caused all kinds of havoc in the leafy neighborhoods of Mount Lebanon. School officials locked down all 10 school buildings and delayed dismissals after police alerted them of the shootings at 2:50 p.m. Students were not allowed to leave until 3:25 p.m. when school officials received word from police that it was safe to let them out, said Superintendent Glenn Smartshawn. Usual dismissal times for the district are 3 p.m. for the high school, 3:03 p.m. for middle schools, and 3:30 p.m. for elementary schools. Because the district only provides transportation in special cases, most of the 726 students walk to school. In the Keystone Oaks School District, officials delayed dismissal at the request of Greentree Police for students who were Greentree residents or attended Aiken Elementary School in Greentree. At the Keystone Oaks High School and Middle School, which are in Mount Lebanon, about 250 students were not released until about 3:50 p.m. Regular dismissal is around 2:40 p.m. for both schools. The 220 Aiken Elementary School pupils were not dismissed until about 4:15 p.m., but that was partly because the same buses that picked up the middle and high school students were used to transport the Aiken youngsters. Normal dismissal time for those pupils is 3:10 p.m. Keystone Oaks also enrolls youngsters from Castle Shannon and Dormont. Heroine recounts shooting outbreak. She alerted police to Baumhammers. By Rachel Conway, Post-Gazette. Diane Wenzig doesn't consider herself a hero. If that were true, she said, accused killer Richard Baumhammer's fifth and final shooting victim, 22-year-old Gary Lee of Aliquippa, would still be alive. "We were told the very next day that we were going to be getting a commendation," said Wenzig, who along with her sister Shirley Kelly were recognized during a public ceremony earlier this month by the Center Township Commissioners for giving police Baumhammer's license plate number and for attempting to save Lee's life. "That was hard for us because it didn't feel like we did right," Wenzig said. Gary Lee died. Yet Wenzig of Center did everything she could that sunny spring afternoon 1 month ago when death strolled up to the door of the C.S. Kim Karate Studio, carefully leveled a gun at Lee, and pulled the trigger. Wenzig, a 38-year-old pizza shop owner with a knack for remembering numbers, had the wherewithal to notice and commit to memory Baumhammer's license plate just moments after she watched the 33-year-old immigration lawyer from Mount Lebanon, who was charged in the death of Lee, and 4 others shoot the gun twice into the air. "BFW 9916, Wenzig said, "It will be in my head forever." In the month since the April 28th shooting spree, which left 5 people dead and 1 wounded in Allegheny and Beaver counties, Wenzig hasn't been able to stop thinking about the violence that shook the quiet shopping plaza where she and her husband Alan run Center Pizza. There are days when Wenzig gets mad that Baumhammers chose to stop at Center Plaza, a small shopping center that also includes a dance club, a beauty products store, a performing arts studio, and a cigar shop. A May 18th court ruling that ordered Baumhammers to undergo at least 90 days of psychiatric treatment before he stands trial only adds to her frustration. "He was caught red-handed. The evidence was on him," Wenzig said. "There is no reasonable doubt that he did this. The anger comes easy. It's the tears," Wenzig said, "that take their toll. "I have some rough days," she said. "We don't know what triggers it. Certain things affect me, and I get teary-eyed. But so far, I've been handling it on my own." Sharon Mixter, who frequents Center Pizza at least twice a week, while her 6-year-old son David practices karate at Kim's, knows the shooting has affected her friend. "I was concerned for her emotionally," Mixter said Thursday as she sat at a counter in Center Pizza waiting for her son. "I still worry, that poor girl." Wenzig, who grew up in rural Raccoon, knows very little about guns. Her father had one locked in a gun cabinet, but she never saw him fire it. So when shots rang out at 3:01 p.m., April 28th, Wenzig wasn't sure what she had just heard. "I thought someone was beating on a garbage can with a baseball bat," Wenzig said. "It just went whap, 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 multiple times. It didn't sound normal." A few minutes earlier, Wenzig had begged her 16-year-old son Travis to make a pot of pizza sauce. Wenzig, who with her husband works from 11 a.m. to midnight, wanted to steal a few moments of peace so she could eat a steak sandwich, her first meal of the day. When Wenzig heard the commotion outside, she ran to the pizza shop's front door. Her sister, son, and daughter, Alana, 15, followed. Wenzig said her recollections of what happened during the next 15 minutes are stunningly clear. Details that would best be forgotten are etched in her mind. As the four stood in the doorway, they watched a tall, well-dressed man wearing sunglasses casually walk from the karate studio toward the pizza shop. The man, later identified as Baumhammers, had a dark briefcase tucked under his left arm. He held a shiny gun in his left hand. As he walked, he seemed to be fiddling with the gun's handle. He walked off the sidewalk and into the parking lot just before he came to the pizza shop door. He fired 2 more shots into the air before climbing into his Jeep and driving away. Wenzig saw the license plate and shouted the numbers to her sister, who was looking for a pencil and paper at the lunch counter. Without knowing if Baumhammers would return, Wenzig ran to the karate studio. She found Lee face down on the floor just inside the open door. Wenzig, who has had no formal medical training, held his wrist feeling for pulse. She checked to see if he was breathing, and she shouted details about Baumhammer's vehicle and license plate to instructor Marcus Murtaugh, who was on the telephone with 911 dispatchers. Within seconds, Lee's heart failed. His breathing stopped. Dispatchers asked Wenzig to find the bullet hole on Lee's body. She searched everywhere until she found a small black hole in the upper right arm sleeve in the back of Lee's white karate uniform. "Turn him over," the dispatcher said. "Lee was a big man," Wenzig said. Murtaugh and a friend of Lee's who had been at the studio during the shooting helped roll the man onto his back. There was so much blood. Lee's heavy body was limp. Like Baumhammer's license plate number, the look in Lee's eyes will haunt Wenzig forever. "They were different," Wenzig said, her voice cracking. An ambulance whisked Lee away, and Wenzig was left to deal with the unimaginable events she had just witnessed. "It really didn't hit me until 2 days later," she said. "It was a beautiful day. I was watching my dogs run around the yard, and I was content and happy with my life. My husband and I have had years to work to fulfill our dreams. That's when I realized Gary Lee will never get to fulfill his hopes and dreams." The people who work and visit the plaza say they won't let the senseless, violent actions of one man destroy their sense of peace and community. Parents are still signing up their children for karate lessons, Instructor Murtaugh said. Mixter's son, who was scheduled for a private lesson with Murtaugh an hour after the shooting, refused to let the rampage keep him away from the studio. "My son didn't want to quit," she said. Monica resident Helen Rambo said she too is glad her 9-year-old son Travis decided to go back to the studio. "This could have happened anywhere, anytime," she said. "I still think this is a safe place." Rambo said She hopes people take notice of Wenzig's disregard for her own safety, her determination to get Baumhammers' license plate number to the police, and her attempt to save Lee's life. "The world needs more people like Wenzig," Rambo said. "There are a lot of people who would see something like that happen and just keep on going," Rambo said. "She could have locked that door and stayed inside here and waited for the police to come." Wenzig doesn't see things that way. "We just did what we would hope anybody would have done in that situation," Wenzig said. "You can't let these people do this. You have to stop and take control." Death penalty for Baumhammers brings tears and cheers. The defense attorney begged for Richard S. Baumhammers' life, but the jury gave him death. The reaction in the crowded courtroom was silent but visible. There were no outbursts from relatives of the 5 people he slaughtered on April 28, 2000. In the second row of the gallery, Sima Horvitz, whose sister, Anita Gordon, was the first of Baumhammers' victims to die, closed her eyes as a tear trickled onto her cheek. She lifted her head skyward and mouthed the words, "Thank you." Bang Bonnie, Ngo's eyes were teary and she batted her long lashes to avoid crying. Her husband Thao Tony Pham was among those killed. Baumhammers sat in silence, with the same blank expression he wore throughout the trial, slumping and looking straight ahead, wearing the same blue blazer and khaki pants, seemingly impervious to the fact that he had just been sentenced to die. And his parents, Andres and Inisa, did not move as jury foreman Ron Frew of Monroeville read the verdicts, delivering a death sentence for each of those killed. Jurors who had appeared alert through 13 days of testimony and legal arguments looked weary, having just concluded 2 deliberations, first on Wednesday, when they convicted Baumhammers of 5 homicides and a host of other charges, and then yesterday when they met for 3 hours and 15 minutes to decide he should die by lethal injection. But in the hall outside the courtroom, several spectators cheered and applauded when word got out that Baumhammers had been sentenced to death. And relatives and friends of the victims, speaking later, were nearly unanimous in agreeing with the decision by the 7 men and 5 women. Common Pleas Judge Jeffrey A. Manning set August 27 as the date for official sentencing. From there, Baumhammers will be destined for death row in the Pennsylvania prison system pending imminent appeals. I think it diminishes all of us individually, as a people, as a nation, that we can put to death someone who is mentally ill, defense attorney James A. Weimard said. The jury on Wednesday deliberated about 2 hours before finding Baumhammers guilty of 28 charges, including 5 murders and paralyzing a 6th victim in a 90-minute attack fueled by racial and ethnic hatred. The assaults, which covered a 20-mile stretch from Mount Lebanon to Center Beaver County, killed Gordon, 63, Baumhammers' next-door neighbor, Pham, 27, of Castle Shannon, G.A. Jerry's son, 34, of Churchill, Anil Thakur, 31, and Gary Lee, 22, of Aliquippa. Sandeep Patel, 26, of India, was shot and paralyzed. Insanity plea. Baumhammers, through his attorneys, pleaded innocent, claiming that he was too insane at the time to know that what he did was wrong. Weimard and William H. Defenderfer said Baumhammers heard voices that told him to kill. Deputy District Attorney Edward J. Borkowski, however, was adamant that Baumhammers was not crazy. In closing arguments during the first phase of the trial, Borkowski called Baumhammers cold, deliberate, calculating, selective, and methodical. That describes his conduct that day. Baumhammers, 35, a suspended lawyer who lived with his parents in Mount Lebanon, seemed as oblivious yesterday as he has throughout the trial, which began April 27th. Zetta Lee, whose son Gary was the 6th shooting victim, said that, as a staunch Christian, She had not hoped for a death sentence against Baumhammers. She only wanted him to be confined in a facility more punishing than a prison hospital. I wanted him to go for life in prison. I wanted him to suffer. I wanted him to feel what we're feeling, Lee continued. I don't think he's ever going to know that. I think that as long as he's alive, he's going to continue to spread his hate. Several psychiatrists who testified during the trial agreed that Baumhammers suffered from a delusional disorder of the persecutory type. But experts for the defense and the prosecution did not agree to what extent Baumhammers was affected on the day of the shootings. Borkowski, in a brief closing argument yesterday before the jury, decided the sentence said that despite the diagnoses, Baumhammers still is a white supremacist and a mass murderer. He mentioned that Baumhammers' parents bore no blame for their son's actions. For all their love and for all their money and output, this defendant manipulated them, Borkowski said. Let him hear the voice of the evidence under the law, the verdict of death, Borkowski said in conclusion. God's decision. Weimard, whose only task in the trial was to argue against the death penalty, fought in vain. He played to the jurors' consciences as he tried to get them to vote for a verdict that would sentence Baumhammers to 5 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole. Look at him! Weimard shouted during his closing argument yesterday as he pointed at his client, who sat with his shoulders hunched. It's clear just by studying him, he has been mentally ill for some time. The only question that remains for your consideration is when he will die, and who will decide when he will die, you or God, Weimard said. I beg you in the name of all that is right, let God make that decision. The jury members hardly blinked during Borkowski's and Weimard's speeches, their faces sullen as the final phase of their duty approached. A day earlier, as they listened to impassioned testimony from relatives of the murder victims, several of the men and women on the jury quietly cried. When their work was finished yesterday, 10 of the jurors accompanied Manning and the attorneys into the judge's chambers for discussions about their experiences. Allegheny County sheriffs, deputies, then whisked them first to the Omni William Penn Hotel so they could get their belongings, and then they departed to their respective homes. None of them responded to persistent media requests for comment. 2 alternate jurors, who were released before the deliberations, spoke briefly to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette by telephone last night. Jerry Gutman, 46 of Plum, said he agreed with the jury's decision on Baumhammers' guilt and on the death sentence. It was a good jury. I would have voted in the same way as the jury. The evidence was overwhelming, and there was no question that the defendant knew what he was doing at the time it was done, Gutman said. That was the key for me. He could tell right from wrong. Bernadette Krause, 64, of West Mifflin said she was just glad she didn't have to participate in the deliberations. I don't know what I would have done. I was praying that none of the regular jurors would be taken off the case because I didn't want to make the decision. Justice is served. Before he sent them home, Manning warned the jurors that they would be sought for interviews. You were called upon the most significant issue ever given to citizens chosen to serve as jurors. The decisions you have individually made, and I tell this to all juries, are the right ones because they are yours to make, Manning said. When I sent you off to deliberate in this case, I told you to do justice. You did just that. Justice is not a result. Justice is a process. Weimard said that the case is a long way from over, as there are many points on which appeals could be based, not the least of which was the judge's ruling that allowed the jury to hear recorded telephone conversations between Baumhammers and his parents. In the recording, the parents scolded their son for bragging and signing autographs for other inmates about his racist exploits. Anise Baumhammers was heard on the recording calling her son a racist. Zeta Lee said that Andres and Inez Baumhammers had apologized to her, but that was not enough to ease her pain. "My son didn't deserve to die, but justice was served," Zeta Lee said. "God is good. God is good." Andres and Inez Baumhammers left the courtroom silently, flanked by lawyer Lee Rothman and several sheriff's deputies. Inez Baumhammers walked at a steady clip, then midway down a flight of stairs to a rear exit, wept briefly, then regained her composure without breaking her stride. The couple headed to a parking garage, got in their car, and left. One member of the defense team described the couple as numb. Inside Manning's chambers, Prosecutor Borkowski hovered worriedly, making occasional and brief telephone calls, and resisting pleas to go into the hallway and comment for the cameras. His co-counsel, Beaver County First Assistant District Attorney Anthony Barash, waited with him. "I'm obviously satisfied with the result," Barash said, dismissing any qualms about whether the state would be executing a mentally ill man. "We don't have trial by experts, we have trial by jury. The jury obviously rejected the opinion of the experts," he said. About an hour after the verdict, Borkowski finally emerged and thanked investigators and Beaver County officials, but took no questions and said he would say nothing else. Borkowski's boss, District Attorney Stephen A. Zappala, Jr., issued a joint statement with Beaver County DA Dale M. Foss. "The jury has spoken and justice has been served. We would once again extend our deepest and sincerest condolences to the victims and the families of the victims in this matter. Their courage in the face of what we can only imagine is unbearable pain is both admirable and inspiring. Finally, as parents, we extend our sympathy to Mr. and Mrs. Baumhammers." Killer's parents' attorneys faced impossible odds. Saturday, May 12, 2001. There is, in the surreal jailhouse, communications between Richard Baumhammers and his parents, captured for posterity and prosecution by a phone tap, a moment of near existentialism. Baumhammers, charged with gunning down immigrants, non-whites, and a Jewish neighbor, was preparing an insanity defense based in part on his long history of insanity. He flummoxed his chances by dispensing autographs, legal advice, and opinions on the political acumen of Adolf Hitler to fellow inmates, who in turn passed this along to prosecutors, eager to show that his were the deliberate crimes of a banal racist. Andres and Inez Baumhammers accepted close to 400 calls from their son, a 35-year-old law school graduate, in the year he spent awaiting trial. He would greet them cheerfully. They would chat. On occasion, because Richard was not allowed his Walkman in jail, his mother would play music over the phone for him. Beatles tunes were a favorite. On March 2nd, the sanguinity is broken. Inez and Andres Baumhammers alternately shriek and wail at their son. "Hello, death row," Inez says. Portions of the tape were played in court this week, but the missing parts shine a hard light on a strange corner of parenting. "You will die. You will be on death row the rest of your life," Inez Baumhammers tells her son. Andres points out the downside. "No visits, no magazines, no commissary, nothing. Zero," he says. Parents will, on occasion, ground their children lift privileges and send them to their rooms. But the exchange between mom and dad Baumhammers and the son they tried to cure of madness while keeping him on a $4,000 a month allowance took on dreamlike aspects that day in March. Their son, accused of a racist rampage, had taken up the mantle of a racist celebrity, and to hear his parents explain it hurt the feelings of his lawyer, Bill Defenderfer. Andres explains, "Bill says that he feels like he's been stabbed in the back." Inez finishes the sentence for him. Mom and Daddy both worked very hard, says Andres. We put financial resources in to help you. Bill worked. Lee Rothman has worked. Through it all, Richard Baumhammers expresses at most irritation at what has happened. His offers to deny the allegation are rejected after his parents point out that prosecutors now have Best Wishes Richard Baumhammers on newspaper and magazine articles about racial strife. Well, I'll just waive the appeal and die, he says. The fury wanes briefly, then resumes. What are you, crazy? Inez, Baumhammers shouts at her son. Yes, I am actually, Richard says. Well, I know, Andres jumps in, but people are not going to believe that. They're going to say you're a racist, Inez says. Mom and Dad know you're mentally ill, Andres adds. Bill can't understand you're mentally ill. I called Bill back and I said, well, you shot people because you're mentally ill, and you're still mentally ill, and you're seeing things because you're mentally ill. But that's hard to explain. Hard indeed. Richard lapses into petulance. To tell you the truth, I don't want to sit in jail the rest of my life. I'd rather be executed anyhow, he says. Well then, execute yourself, Inez barks. Well, I will, he pouts back. By conversation's end, Richard has taken on the manners of a child about to quit a game he's losing. I'm firing my attorneys and I'm defending myself, he says. No, you're not, they both shout. He didn't. In the courtroom this week, James Wymard, a thin, hyperactive man assigned to save Richard Baumhammers from the injection table, sat beside his client, a young man who looked like Buddha on quaaludes, and thrashed around for some way to do his job. As family members of the victims took the stand, they poured out their grief, the mother whose daughter has withdrawn into herself, the widow whose 6-year-old still cries out for his father. Wymard could do little but add his sympathy and thank them for coming. I got a mountain to climb, he muttered to himself as jurors filed out during a break. They have blood in their eyes. They have blood in their mouths. I'm trying to find some way to reach one of them, if I could just reach one of them. But the one who really had to be reached was by then standing up and, in a habit learned over the past 13 months, putting his wrists behind his back and waiting for the handcuffs. Victims left in wake of rampage. The 5 people slain in yesterday's rampage ranged from a neighbor of the suspects to complete strangers. Information on all but Mount Lebanon resident Nikki Gordon was sketchy. At Robinson Town Center and Scott Town Center, police roped off the shooting scenes and whisked family members of the victims in and out without letting them speak to reporters. And later in the day, the family members of the victims either couldn't be located or refused to answer questions, saying they were too distraught. Here are sketches of the 5 people who were shot to death, plus a 6th victim who was shot in the neck and remained hospitalized. Anita Nikki Gordon. The cruelest irony of Nikki Gordon's life was that she died violently. She was the kindest person in the world, said Ellen Selker, her good friend for 30 years. Gordon, 63, was shot dead yesterday at the beginning of a killing rampage that police believe was committed by Richard Baumhammers. He is suspected of killing 4 more people after Gordon, who was his next-door neighbor when he was growing up in Mount Lebanon. Gordon and Baumhammers were residents of the stately Virginia Manor neighborhood. Allegheny County property ownership records show that both families settled there in 1969 when Baumhammers was about 4 years old. That he, or anyone, would harm Gordon was inconceivable to her friends. She had a heart of gold, said Lois Balk, another longtime friend. Balk, like others who knew Gordon, couldn't bring herself to say anything else. The hurt of losing her friend was too much. Gordon's death, like much of the rampage, seemed to have racial or ethnic overtones. Gordon, born Anita B. Horvitz on November 22, 1936, was Jewish. After she was slain, investigators believe Baumhammers attacked 2 synagogues including Bethel congregation in Scott, where a swastika was smeared on a brick wall and glass doors were shot out. Bethel was where Gordon and her husband Sanford attended services. Rabbi Neil Scheindlin, who has been at Bethel for 4 years, knew Gordon slightly. Scheindlin said Gordon and her husband were longtime members of the congregation. The Gordons have 3 daughters, Annette Gordon of Amity, Linda Gordon of Boston, and Dr. Nancy Gordon of Philadelphia. Gordon also is survived by a sister, Sima Horvitz of Squirrel Hill. Gordon loved dogs and was especially devoted to her Shetland sheepdog Chipper. She also was a talented amateur interior decorator, loved art, and thrived on travel with her husband. "We used to laugh that she'd been everywhere twice, so she would have to go to the moon," said Sylvia Sachs, another friend. Turnout for the last night's regular service at Bethel was substantially higher than normal. People from throughout the region attended in part to remember Gordon, whose gentle ways ended on one of the most violent days in the region's history. Theopham. Pham 20 Sain of Castle Shannon was a delivery man at Yafei Chinese Cuisine at Robinson Town Center. He was attacked inside the restaurant in front of customers. Ji Ye-sun, son 34 of Churchill, was the manager of the restaurant. He also was shot in front of onlookers. A woman who answered the phone at his house said, "I don't think we can talk about this right now. We are in a very, very bad mood." Gary Lee. Lee, 22, was a beginning student at the C.S. Kim School of Karate in Center Beaver County. He had gone to work out with his best friend when he was shot. The manager of the supermarket where Lee worked refused to talk about Lee, and his friend could not be located later. Police also refused to answer questions about Lee. Anil Thakur. Thakur, 31, in the United States on a work permit, was shot dead at the India Grocer in Scott Town Center. He originally was from Bihar, India, and has no known relatives in the United States. He worked for the Widecom Group, a Canada-based producer of copiers and scanners. Sandeep Patel. Patel, 25, is manager of the India Grocer. He was shot in the neck and suffered paralysis. Doctors operated on him for 2 hours to remove the bullet. He was in critical condition last night, but his vital signs had stabilized, said Linda Ross, a spokeswoman at Mercy Hospital.